My husband disappeared, and the police have no leads. The video opens with me holding a single, worn baseball cap. It's a little faded, the brim curved just right. I'm turning it over and over in my hands, unable to look away from it. This was his. It's one of the last things he touched before he just walked out of my life forever. For 6 months, the police have been looking for my husband. Yesterday, they told me they have no more leads. To them, it's a cold case. But they don't know what I know. They haven't seen the secrets I'm starting to find. And I'm realizing, I might have been married to a man I never really knew at all. Section 1. The Before. My husband's name is Mark Peterson. Or, well, that's the name I knew him by for 12 years. He was predictable. And I don't mean that in a bad way. He was my rock, my constant. In a world that felt like it was getting more and more chaotic, Mark was the calm eye of the storm. He was an architectural historian, a man who loved the solid, quiet permanence of old buildings. He loved things that were built to last. I really thought we were one of them. We met in a library. I know, it's so cliché it sounds fake, but it's true. I was reaching for a book on Renaissance art, and his hand was going for a book on Gothic cathedrals. Our hands brushed. He was shy, his smile was a little hesitant, but his eyes were so kind. He asked me to coffee, and we ended up talking for 4 hours. The way he talked about flying buttresses and rose windows, it was with the same passion someone else might have for their favorite sports team. I was completely captivated. Our life together was built on these small, comfortable rituals. The way he'd make coffee every single morning, always leaving my favorite mug out for me. The sound of his keys in the door, sharp, at exactly 6:15 p.m. Our Friday nights, ordering a pizza and watching old black and white movies. He wasn't a man for grand gestures. He never bought me dozens of roses or whisked me away on some surprise trip. His love was quieter. It was in the details. It was him putting a blanket over me when I'd fall asleep on the couch, or him always remembering to buy my favorite ice cream. It was the way he would actually listen when I talked about my day. He was quiet, more of an observer. He liked the sidelines more than the spotlight. At parties, he was that guy in the corner, nursing one drink, just happy to watch everyone else. I guess some people might have thought he was boring. But for me, his stillness was a comfort. It was a safe harbor. I'm a worrier. My mind is always going 100 miles an hour. He was the one person who could always calm me down, who could just look at me and say, "It's going to be okay." And I'd actually believe him. We had a modest house in a quiet suburb, a golden retriever named Gus. We had a garden that we were both awful at keeping alive, but we had fun failing at it together. We'd talk about having kids one day when we were a little more settled, a little more financially secure. We had a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. We had our whole lives mapped out, a blueprint for a future that felt as solid and dependable as one of his old buildings. I look back on that time now, and it feels like a different life. Like a movie I saw once about 2 people who were happy and safe, and just completely oblivious. I sift through the memories, the photographs. Us on our honeymoon in Tuscany, squinting in the sun. Us laughing at some restaurant on our 5th anniversary. A candid shot of him in our living room, reading a book while Gus slept at his feet. In every single photo, he looks content. He looks happy. He looks like a man who is everything he ever wanted. Was it all a lie? That's the question that just haunts me. How does a person who seemed so rooted, so grounded, just vanish? How can the life we built, something that felt so real, just dissolve into nothing? The police, the detectives, they see a statistic, a case file, but I see the empty side of the bed. I see his coffee mug gathering dust on the counter. I see the man I loved, a man I thought I knew better than myself. And I have to face this terrifying idea that the person I shared my home with was a complete stranger. The man I knew wouldn't just leave. He wouldn't leave me. He wouldn't leave Gus. So if he didn't just leave, then what happened? And who was the man who did? Section 2. The Disappearance. The day he disappeared was a Tuesday. It was painfully, agonizingly normal. That's the part that gets me, the part my brain just plays on a loop. There was no big fight, no tearful confession, no warning signs at all. It was just a Tuesday in March. The morning was like any other. The alarm went off at 6:30. Mark grumbled, hit the snooze button once, and rolled out of bed. A few minutes later, the smell of coffee filled the house. I came downstairs and found him standing by the kitchen window, looking out at the yard. My mug was right there on the counter, where it always was. "Morning," I said, and kissed his cheek. He smelled like his usual soap and that faint, papery scent of old books that was always on him. He smiled, that soft, sleepy smile. "Morning. Looks like it might rain." That was it. That was our whole conversation. The weather. We did our usual dance, moving around each other like we had for years. He showered and got dressed while I let Gus out. I made toast while he packed his briefcase. It was so mundane. The only thing that was even a little out of place was what he said as he was leaving. He was standing at the door, his briefcase in one hand, his keys in the other. He had on his gray suit, the one he wore for important meetings. "I love you," I said. It's what I always said. "I love you too," he said, and his eyes met mine. He just paused for a second, and there was a flicker of something in his face I couldn't quite read. Not sadness, not really. It was intense. He just looked at me, really looked at me, for a solid 5 seconds. Then he said, "Remember that. No matter what." I just smiled back. "Okay." A little dramatic for a Tuesday, but okay. "Have a good day." He kissed me, a little longer than usual. And then he was gone. I watched his car back out of the driveway and drive down the street. Remember that. No matter what. At the time, I just thought it was sweet, a little romantic moment in an ordinary day. Now, those words just echo in my head. A premonition. A warning. A goodbye. The rest of my day was completely normal. I worked from home, walked the dog, threw in a load of laundry. At 6 o'clock, I started dinner. I expected to hear his keys in the door at 6:15, like always. 6:20 came and went. Nothing. By 6:45, I was starting to get annoyed. He was so punctual. If he was running late, he'd call. He'd text. I checked my phone. Not a single missed call or message. I texted him, "Hey, where are you? Dinner's almost ready." No reply. By 7:30, annoyance had turned into real worry. This just wasn't like him. Not at all. I called his cell. It rang, and then finally went to voicemail. "Hey, it's Mark. Leave a message." Hearing his calm, steady voice was so jarring when panic was starting to bubble up in my chest. I called again, and again. Voicemail. Every time. I called his office. The cleaning crew picked up. They said everyone in his department left hours ago, around 5:30. I called his best friend, David. He hadn't heard from him. I called his parents. They hadn't either. By 9 p.m., I was in a full-blown panic. My heart was hammering against my ribs. My hands were shaking. I was just pacing back and forth in the living room, with Gus whining at my feet, picking up on my distress. Every single car that drove down our street made my head snap toward the window, with this desperate surge of hope that was immediately crushed. The dinner I'd made was sitting on the stove, cold. The house, which was usually my comfort zone, felt huge and silent and scary. His side of the couch was empty. His reading lamp was off. The silence was deafening. It was the sound of absence. It was the sound of something being terribly, terribly wrong. At 10:17 p.m., I did the only thing I could think to do. I picked up my phone, my fingers trembling so hard I could barely dial, and I called 911. "My husband," I managed to say, my voice cracking. "My husband is missing. Hashtag section 3, the investigation and frustration." People say you have to wait 24 hours to report someone missing, but that's a myth. There is no waiting period. I learned that as I stood on my own front porch, talking to 2 uniformed officers who looked way too young to be handling something that felt this huge, this terrifying. They were polite, professional, but their questions felt so cold and clinical. When was the last time you saw him? Did you have an argument? Is it possible he just went to a friend's house to cool off? I felt this flash of anger. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't Mark cooling off. This was wrong. A tear in the fabric of our life. I tried to explain that, to get them to understand how deeply, instinctively wrong this was, but they just nodded and wrote in their little notepads. I felt like I was being interviewed for a job I never wanted, a position that was suddenly open, the worried wife. The next day, a lead detective was assigned to the case. Detective Miller. He was older, a little paunchy, with tired eyes that looked like they'd seen it all. He sat at my dining room table, the same table where Mark and I had shared 1,000 meals, and he spoke in this calm, measured voice that was supposed to be reassuring but just made me feel more frantic. He walked me through the steps. They'd issue a bolo, be on the lookout, for Mark in his car. They'd ping his cell phone, check his credit cards, talk to his coworkers. He was gentle when he explained the statistics. He said that in his experience, most missing adult cases solve themselves pretty quickly. He said a lot of adults who disappear do it on purpose. They get overwhelmed. They want a new life. They just need space. Maybe he just needed to get away for a few days, he suggested, his voice laced with this practiced, weary sympathy. No, I said, my voice sharp. You don't understand. He wouldn't do that. That's not him. Something happened to him. Detective Miller just gave me this sad, patient look. The look of a man who's heard this exact thing 1,000 times from 1,000 other frantic wives. That was the first time I felt it. That horrible, sinking feeling of being completely alone in what I knew to be true. To them, Mark's disappearance was a puzzle with a boring, likely answer. To me, it was an impossible nightmare. The first few weeks were a blur of activity. Friends and family brought over casseroles and empty platitudes. Volunteers organized search parties, combing through local parks and woods. Mark's face was on the news, on flyers we taped to telephone poles. His smile, the one I knew so well, staring back at me from a grainy photo, a ghost in my own town. A week after he vanished, the police found his car. It was parked legally in a long-term lot at the airport. Keys gone. Briefcase gone. No sign of a struggle. To the police, this was a huge clue. It points to a voluntary departure, Detective Miller told me. He parked the car, he got on a plane. But there were no records of him buying a ticket. He didn't use his credit cards, his passport, nothing. He hadn't pulled out any large sums of cash. He just stopped existing, officially. As the weeks bled into months, everything slowed down. Friends stopped coming by as often. The news moved on. The flyers on the poles faded and tore in the rain. The calls from Detective Miller got less and less frequent. At first, it was every day, then every few days, then once a week. And his updates were always the same. No new leads, Sarah. Nothing. We just have to wait. Waiting is its own special kind of hell. It's like being in suspended animation. You can't grieve because there's no body. You can't move on because there's always that tiny sliver of hope, a little flame that just refuses to go out. Psychologists call it ambiguous loss. The person is physically gone, but psychologically, they're still here, a ghost in your every waking moment. It's this grief that has no resolution, no closure, and it just freezes you in place. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I'd jump every time the phone rang. I'd stare at every stranger's face on the street, half expecting, half dreading that I'd see him. Then yesterday, 6 months to the day he disappeared, I got the call I'd been dreading. It was Detective Miller. His voice was flat, bureaucratic. He told me that with no new evidence and no leads, they were moving Mark's case from active to cold. It would stay open, of course. Case file AZ 881 L3. But no one would be actively working on it anymore. The resources had to go elsewhere. A cold case. The words felt like a punch to the gut. It was an official surrender. It was the system, the people who were supposed to help. telling me my husband wasn't a priority anymore. He was just an unsolvable riddle they were happy to leave on a shelf. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in 6 months, I didn't cry. The sadness and the fear, it all hardened into something else. Anger. They might be done searching, but I wasn't. If the man I married was out there, I was going to find him. And if he was a stranger who built a life on lies, I'd find that man, too. Section 4. The Turning Point and the Search. The police had packed up Mark's life into a series of neat, unhelpful reports. Mark Peterson, age 38, voluntarily abandoned his car. No evidence of foul play. Case cold. They had looked at the surface, at the tidy life he showed the world, and they just shrugged. But I lived in that life. I knew its hidden corners, its locked drawers. And that's where I was going to start. My search began in the one room that was all his home office. For 6 months, I'd kept the door shut. It was too painful. But now, I opened the door not as a grieving wife, but as an investigator. I was looking for a crack in the facade, a detail that didn't fit the perfect, predictable man I thought I knew. I started with his desk. The top drawers were just normal. Pens, paper clips, staplers, all neatly organized. I went through every single file in his cabinet. Contracts, research notes on Victorian architecture, our tax returns. Everything was perfectly ordered. Everything was perfectly marked. For hours, I found nothing. I felt that familiar despair creeping back in. Maybe the police were right. Then I got to the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet. It was locked. Just a small, simple lock. Mark didn't lock things. We didn't have secrets. Or so I thought. I looked for a key for about 10 minutes before I gave up and went to the garage for a crowbar. The sound of the wood splintering open felt like a betrayal. Inside, there was only one thing. A thin cardboard folder. My heart started pounding as I lifted it out. It wasn't a hidden passport or a secret bank account. It was a credit card statement. A card I'd never seen. In his name, billed to a P.O. box in a town 30 miles away. The statement was from 4 months before he disappeared. There were only a few charges. Gas, a couple of cash withdrawals, and one very large, very strange purchase, a Celestron Astromaster 130 EQ telescope, shipped to the P.O. box. I just sat there on the floor, the paper shaking in my hand. A telescope? In 12 years, Mark had never once shown any interest in astronomy. He was a man who looked down at foundations and floor plans, not up at the stars. Why on earth would he secretly buy a powerful telescope? It made no sense. Fueled by this, I started tearing the room apart. I pulled books from shelves, shaking them out. I checked the pockets of all his jackets. Nothing. Finally, I turned to his old journals. He'd kept them since college, mostly just sketches of buildings and research notes. I'd flipped through them before, months ago, looking for a suicide note or some kind of clue. But this time, I wasn't just looking. I was hunting. I went through all 20 of them, page by page. And in the very back of a journal from 5 years ago, tucked into a little paper sleeve he'd glued to the inside cover, I found it. A single sheet of paper, folded into a tiny square. On it, in Mark's neat handwriting, was a list. AZ 881 L3 34 0489 degree N 111 0937 degree W A T 15 years. The watcher sees what is hidden. My blood ran cold. AZ 881 L3. It was the case number. The one Detective Miller had given me yesterday. How is that possible? Mark had written it down 5 years ago. My fingers flew across my laptop. I typed in the coordinates. The result popped up instantly. A remote, empty patch of the Tonto National Forest in Arizona. A place of rock and scrub brush, miles from anywhere. Then I typed in the last line. The watcher sees what is hidden. Nothing. Just nonsense. Frustrated, I tried the initials. A. T. 15 years Arizona, went into the search bar. The very first result was a link to a cold case file on the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. My breath caught in my throat. The case was for a man named Eris Thorne, a geologist and amateur astronomer who disappeared 15 years ago. He went on a solo trip into the Tonto National Forest to watch a meteor shower and never came back. They found his car at a trailhead. His campsite was undisturbed. But Eris Thorne and the expensive telescope he'd taken with him were gone without a trace. His last known location was just a few miles from the coordinates in Mark's note. I leaned back, my head spinning, trying to connect these impossible dots. My husband, an architectural historian, had the case number for his own future disappearance written in a journal 5 years ago. He had coordinates for the Arizona desert. He had the initials of a man who vanished there 15 years ago. And months before he disappeared, he secretly bought a high-powered telescope. The police saw a man who wanted to leave his life. They were wrong. He wasn't running from his life. He was running towards something. Something that started 15 years ago, in the middle of the Arizona desert, with a missing man named Eris Thorne. The phrase from the note echoed in my head. Asterisk, the watcher sees what is hidden. Asterisk, Mark wasn't just a historian. He was a watcher, and he had seen something. Something that either got him killed or made him run for his life. The police saw the end of a trail. I see a beginning. They saw a cold case, a file to put on a shelf and forget about. I see a thread, a single, terrifying thread that connects my quiet, predictable husband to a 15-year-old mystery in the desert. Who was Eris Thorne? And what did Mark Peterson, my Mark, have to do with a man who vanished over a decade ago? Was he investigating this all on his own? Did he find out something so dangerous he had to disappear to protect himself, or to protect me? The questions are just spiraling in my mind, each one scarier than the last. Remember that, no matter what. His last words to me. He knew. He knew this was coming. I don't know where this path leads me. I don't know if I'll find him, or just more secrets and more pain. But I have to follow it. I have to know who I was married to. I have to know what he was watching. So this is where my real search begins. I'm not a detective. I'm just a woman who has lost everything and has nothing left to lose. If you have any theories, any ideas at all, no matter how small you think they are, please leave them in the comments below. Every perspective helps, and right now, I feel so alone in this. Please, share this video. The more people who see this, the greater the chance that someone, somewhere, might know something. Something about Mark Peterson, or something about a man named Eris Thorne who went missing in Arizona. And please, subscribe for updates. I'm going to document every step of my search. I am going to find the truth. I have to, because his story isn't over, and neither is mine. What you think about this story? Write in the comment your opinion. On my channel, you can watch other revenge or cheating stories. See you soon, my dear viewer.